how about the numbers from the day that he had it to the day that you had it? Did the numbers go up, down, or stay the same?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer one thing real quick on your last question before I answer that, and that is, this was really important to me.
Okay.
When I purchased the podcast, I set it up so that my payment, it was a sectional payment over 12 months. So every quarter I paid him. And that was really valuable to me because I didn't have a ton of money. And I was able to split my payment up into 4 big chunks versus one massive chunk at the start of the year. That also held him responsible for delivering what he said he would deliver. So I think that's a good thing to notice.
Awesome.
In regard to your second question, the numbers going up and down was a big concern of mine. And what I did is a couple things. One, I actually acted as a speaker on his podcast a couple times. So I started to learn what his process was and what he was doing and how it would flow. The next thing is that gave me an introduction to the people in his podcast, so they knew who I was when I took over. The other thing that happened was when I took it over, I really concentrated on staying similar in nature to what his best producing podcasts were, but also emphasizing that there would be some changes and some excitement about that, and did that with the podcast. The last thing I did is I did some really simple social post measuring. I would say, hey, do you like the podcast how it is? Do you want to see these changes, et cetera? And I got some really good feedback. And that also came from some of the review notes. I reviewed the notes, what they liked, what they didn't like. Sound quality was an issue. So I addressed sound quality. Interruption in talking to the guests and hosts was an issue. So I worked on that pretty hard. But I think a lot of things can be done via homework to get yourself set up for success.
So I'm hearing 4 things that happened. And I'm curious if did you ever co-host with him for a while?
I didn't co-host with him. We had one transfer hosted podcast where we came on. We basically said, there's some big news coming. I want to introduce you to Christian. He's your new host for the show, yada, yada, yada. And then he interviewed me a little bit on that, but then I turned and flipped the script and interviewed him. What have you learned along the way? What are you going to be doing next, et cetera? And kind of gave that story as well.
Okay. So you interviewed each other as well. Okay. So I'm going to write that down. In no particular order, I've got 5 things that you did. Interview each other. All right. So you guessed it. And then also you looked at the content. You looked at which content was the most popular, which episodes got the most downloads. You decided to make sure to stay focused on those. Number 3 is you asked the audience what they were looking for, what they liked, what they didn't like. Number 4 was you went and read the written reviews of the podcast. And so any perhaps negative feedback. And you mentioned a couple of them, like the audio quality, which you said you fixed, and what it was, interrupting the guest. Yeah,
at times he was known for being excited, I think, in his question asking, and they would be listing out a few things and talking through his story perhaps, and he would, well, tell me about that, and it was like, I really wanted to hear what that guest wanted to say. And that was just a little bit of feedback, and some of that feedback came through written, but I also called probably 10 different people that I knew listened to the podcast or sent them and said, what do you think of this podcast? And got really good feedback for that.